Welcome to NDUB lecture series. Every first and last Saturdays of the month, as you all know, we present veteran scholars in academic, chaired by our professor Ghulam Sarwar Chaudhry, the head of the Department of English at Nottingham University, Bangladesh. And today, our topic of discussion is Rabindranath and Rokeya, autodidacts as educational pioneers. And it would be a discussion lectured by none other than very veteran scholar Muhammad A. Qayyum, who is a professor of English at International Islamic University, Malaysia, also an adjunct professor in the College of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences at Flinders University in Australia. And also he has several publications, 34 books, 140 journal articles, and so on. So we are pleased to have you, sir. I would request our chair, Professor Ghulam Sarwar Chaudhry, to introduce today's audience. The floor is yours, sir.
Welcome, Karim bhai. Welcome. It's nice to see you after such a long time. Although we discuss on the phone. Shams has already introduced you. I will introduce you a little differently. As you know, Professor Tapan Rai Chaudhry, the famous historian, colleagues and students who are listening to me. Professor Tapan Rai Chaudhry, famous historian who was originally from Borishal, migrated to India. He died a couple of years ago. So in his autobiography, he writes that first he wanted to do a master's in English. But then he changed his mind because he thought that usually people who do an MA in English in the subcontinent and go on and complete their PhD, they end up publishing their PhD dissertation as a book, and then throughout their lives, whatever articles they can write, they put them together and do another book. So Tapan Rai Chaudhry said, I changed to history because I would not be satisfied by only writing 2 books. So here is one man, Professor Qayyum, Professor of English, who has more than 40 books. And all these 40 books, mostly published from Western publishers, including one of my favorite books of his, Saul Bellow and American Transcendentalism, which he published in New York in 2004, published by Peter Lang. Another is Colonial to Global, Malaysian Women's Writing in English. I didn't read it. 1940s to 1990s. From Malaysia Islamic International University, that he published in 2001 and 2003. Then among his numerous books that he edited, Tagore, Nationalism and Cosmopolitanism, Perceptions, Contestations and Contemporary Relevances, UK Routledge, 2020. Then he has Malaysian Literature in English, A Critical Companion, University of Cambridge Scholars Publishing, 2020. A Feminist for Mother, Critical Essays on Rokeya Shekhawat Hussain, New Delhi, Orient Longman, in 2016. And of course, he publishes a very prestigious, he's the founder, publisher, a founder editor of this journal that he used to publish, he still publishes, from the Islamic University, International Islamic University, Malaysia. I understand that he has retired from IIUM and he has moved to Australia because he's an Australian citizen and he is an adjunct with 2 renowned Australian universities. He has 150 plus books, journal articles. So I want to speak about his publications. Anybody can Google up Professor Qayyum or M.A. Qayyum and look up at what kind of a scholar he is, the caliber of his scholarship, the range of his writings. which is stupendous, unimaginable. My pride is that I know him. I know him very closely because we worked for a few years, not too many years, at Chittagong University before he left for Canada, where he did his second master's, and then from Canada he came to Australia to do his PhD. And after doing his PhD in Australia, he came back to Bangladesh, taught at Dhaka University for several years, and I think took the right decision of going to Malaysia, where he has emerged as a giant now in scholarship. So Bangladesh can be real proud of an academic and a scholar of the height of Professor Qayyum, of the caliber of Professor Qayyum. And it's my pleasure that I have such a close relationship with him. When I requested him to speak in our series, he immediately, he said, how can I say no to you? So thank you so much, Qayyum Bhai. I can go on introducing you, and that will be a presentation itself that I don't want. So I'm handing you over to speak on Rabindranath and Rokeya, autodidacts as educational pioneers. Many of my students might not know the term autodidact. Autodidact is a person who educates himself or herself, a self-educated person. So both Tagore, Rabindranath, I prefer to call him Thakur because Tagore is colonial. Rabindranath Thakur and Rokeya Shahwat Sen were self-educated. However, they were pioneers in education in their own ways. Over to Professor Qayyum.
Thank you, Professor Sarwar. Thank you for the honor. Thank you for inviting me. And now I'm going to speak on two iconic writers, Rabindranath and Rokeya. Not on their writing, but on their educational thoughts as well as practices. Now, Rabindranath and Rokeya were contemporaries. As you would know, Rabindranath was born in 1861 and Rokeya was born only 19 years after that. Now, when I published my book, Beyond Boundaries, from Bangla Academy, renowned and most respected Professor Sirajul Islam Chaudhary, he wrote the foreword for the book. And in that book, he said, reading my comparative essay on Rabindranath and Rokeya, he said that this is the first time he has read something comparing the two writers. I was astounded by that, because if nobody has written comparing Rabindranath and Rokeya, or if there are few writers only or critics writing on them, comparing their thoughts and writings, that would be a big surprise to me. Now, I must tell you that I live outside Bangladesh. I've been living outside Bangladesh for almost 38 years. So I don't have free access to Bengali books. And I hardly get anything on Rokeya in Australia. Nothing much is available, except for my own books. And Rabindranath, of course, as you know, he is globally known. So a lot of material on Rabindranath is available here, but not much on Rokeya. So I have to buy books online from Bangladesh. So I don't have the free access that most of the Bangladeshi critics would have on Rokeya. And for that matter, on Bengali writings on Rabindranath. So when I read that comment by my professor, Sirajul Islam Chaudhary, I was surprised because I see a lot of similarities between the two writers. Let me give you a catalogue of the similarities that they have. Now, of course, to begin with, both are writers. Both are bilingual writers. And in case of Rokeya, she's a trilingual writer because Rokeya wrote in Bengali, in English, as well as Urdu. But most of her writings were in Bengali. And both of them were myriad-minded, meaning that they had interest in multiple things, not just writing. They were interested in multiple genres of writing as well as other activities. They were both activists in many ways. And both came from Zamindar family. Both are originally Bangladeshis, as you would know, because maybe you don't know that Rabindranath's family actually originates from Khulna. They moved to Calcutta because there was a scandal in the family in the 18th century when one of the ancestors of Rabindranath was cheated into eating beef by a Muslim who had converted to Islam from Hinduism, and his name was Pir Ali. So Tagore's ancestors came to be known as Pir Ali Brahmins because they ate beef, so actually they lost their caste. So to avoid that scandal, they came to Calcutta. So that's how they came to India, what is now modern India. Of course, at that time, it was all India, right? There was no Bangladesh or Pakistan. It was British India. And I'm going to use the word India throughout my talk to mean British India, not the present-day India. And what is interesting is that both Rabindranath and Rokeya actually lived most of their life in Kolkata. All right. Of course, Rabindranath from childhood and Rokeya from 1911 till her death in 1932. And as Professor Sarwa had just mentioned, and as the word is there in my title, autodidact. Both of them were autodidacts, meaning they were self-educated or home-educated. So they had no formal education, so to speak. I mean, Rabindranath had bit. He went to school for about 6 years, and then he used to fail most of the time, and he would hardly go to classes. So he decided to drop out at the age of 13. And so both of them were writers, began as writers, but they got interested in education. And they not only thought about education, they were not only visionaries in the field of education, but they were also into practice, meaning that they set up institutions, all right, to put their ideas into practice. So notice how many similarities I've already listed there between the two writers. And both of them fought for justice and equality in society. For Rabindranath, for everybody, in spite of caste, creed, religion, he fought for justice for all. And I'll explain that later. And of course, Rokeya also fought for justice, but mostly for women, because she believed that women in India were quote-unquote shipwrecked, meaning that they were floating in a vast ocean. Nobody was there to rescue them. So she came to the rescue. So in other words, both of them fought for gender justice, because if you read Rabindranath's short stories like Dena Pauna, Postmaster, Mohamaya, Shasti, Noshtonir, these are stories I've translated actually, published by Macmillan. So you'll see that how she fights for justice for women. He fights for justice for women. And both of them are very inclusive in their imagination. Both of them actually believed in Hindu-Muslim harmony. Although we often think of Rokeya as somebody who fought for the education of Muslim girls, which is true, but she never actually had any prejudice against the Hindus. And the article that actually I wrote in my book, Beyond Boundaries, and on which Professor Sirajul Islam Chaudhary commented, is Hindu-Muslim relationship in the writings of Rabindranath and Rokeya. And both of them actually ended up with a cosmopolitan outlook, meaning that they loved India, but they always extended their vision beyond India. All right? So these are some of the similarities that we see. But I'm not going to talk on all of this. I'm going to focus on their educational enterprise. Now, the differences, of course, are there. Gender, one was a man, the other was a woman. And this is a huge difference. Because, mind you, Ruqaya's gender, the fact that she was a woman, the fact that she was a widow, all these always throughout her life went against her. All right? Her challenges were far greater than Rabindranath. Only because she was a woman, only because she became a widow, only because she was a Muslim. So these are the challenges that she constantly faced while trying to establish and then later run her school. And of course, Rabindranath came from a very progressive religion, Brahmo Samaj. His father founded the religion, grandfather actually started with Ram Mohan Roy, and then father actually popularized it, and Rabindranath subscribed to it. And Brahmo Samaj is actually, as Rabindranath defined it, he defined it as inner Hinduism, meaning that they subscribed only to the spiritual side of Hinduism, i.e. Upanishadic Hinduism, but not the ritualistic side of it. And they were highly progressive. And both of them, as I said, were bilingual, in case of Ruqaya, trilingual writer. But the fundamental difference is that Rabindranath was brought up in a Bengali environment, but Ruqaya was brought up in an Urdu environment. Her family language was Urdu. And yet she broke away from that and started writing in Bengali. And one critic, at least I have come across one critic who said that Ruqaya has a huge contribution to the independence of Bangladesh because the pride that she gave us for the Bengali language, especially for Bengali Muslim women, because mind you, those days, Bengali Muslim women would be speaking Urdu in Calcutta mostly. And she gave us the idea that no, as Bengalis, we must adhere to our mother tongue. All right? So she actually introduced Bengali later in her school. So the pride of identity as Bengalis that she inculcated in us eventually motivated us to fight against the imposition of Urdu in Bangladesh, according to one critic. That's a huge claim, but I have not really investigated fully on that. But I would tend to agree on it. Now, of course, we know that Tagore, I might use the name Tagore, although Professor Sarwar said it's colonized. I've been living in outside Bangladesh for 38 years. And outside Bangladesh, Rabindranath is known as Tagore. So whenever I'm invited to give talks on Tagore, I've been to Myanmar as well, to America, Australia, in many parts of the world to give lectures on Rabindranath. I'm used to calling him Tagore. So I might, call him Tagore from time to time. Please forgive me for doing that. It's just a matter of habit. Now we know that, Rabindranath was the first non-European to get the Nobel Prize. And he is the author of national anthems of two countries, Bangladesh and India. And also, of course, the inspiration behind the national anthem of Sri Lanka. All right? And he's also the person who composed the national song of India. Not the anthem, but the song. And he was knighted. He was given honorary doctorate for his literary accomplishments by Oxford University. So his status is beyond any dispute. With regard to Ruqaya, of course, she was not as famous outside South Asia because, as I said, mainly because she was a woman. So in those days, people would not take the literary talents of women or any other talent of women seriously. Notice what Robert Southey, a poet laureate of England, wrote to Charlotte Bronte in a letter in 1837, about 40 years before Ruqaya was born. All right? And I'll just read one line from that infamous letter. He said, "Literature cannot be the business of a woman's life, and it ought not to be. So what should be the business of a woman's life? Marriage, giving birth, becoming a wife and mother. This is coming from one of the leading writers of the time, Robert Sade. All right. So after receiving that letter, Charlotte Bronte and her two sisters actually changed their names to male pen names so that they would be accepted by the readers. So Rokeya was born 40 years after that. In India, mind you, and India was far more entrenched in patriarchy. We are still living under the shadow of somebody called Manu. I'm not sure whether you have heard his name or not. Manu was a 2nd century Hindu theologian, and he has left behind many books. All right, the laws of Manu or Manusmriti. All right, there he propounded certain theories about women, which was actually used by the British to codify Hindu way of life in India during the British colonial time. And mind you, although we are Muslims, actually we have been living under the shadow of Hindu culture for thousands of years. And therefore, some of those thoughts are still there in our mind. Whether we are Hindus or Muslim doesn't matter. We are all Bangladeshis, we are all South Asians. So we should not differentiate ourselves on the basis of religion. All right? And we have influenced one another. Okay? And that is the beauty of India, because South Asia or India's British India, I'm talking about British India here, is where two huge cultures have come together and influenced one another. And what did Mr. Manu say about women? I'll not read the whole stuff. I'll just give you 2 quotations. And you'll see that that is still true now in many of our imaginations. One is, he said, a husband should be worshipped as a god. I'm sure many husbands still think that in Bangladesh. A husband should be worshipped as God. In fact, the word for husband is husband. Rokeya said husband means Lord. But the Bangla word Shami means Lord actually. All right. So we have to worship the husband. So if a husband has to be worshipped, what is the status of women in society then? Where is the sense of equality? All right. So if they are seen as second-rate people in society, of course their talent is not appreciated. So I'm trying to highlight that disadvantage that Rokeya had when she started writing her Bengali stuff. Second, which is far more outrageous, he said women, Shudra. So women are being compared to the lowest caste in Hinduism. Women, Shudra, dog and crow embody untruth, sin and darkness. So given that kind of outlook, that was propagated by Manu and later adopted by the British during the colonial time, of course has influenced our outlook towards women. All right? And Rokeya was constantly fighting against that. Therefore, her reputation may not have crossed South Asian borders, but she was still a very, very significant writer. And she's I think she's the only female Muslim writer who is seen as part of Bengal Renaissance. Mohitlal Majumdar, a contemporary Bengali writer, said that Rokeya is the soul and consciousness of Bengal. India, actually he used the word India there. Abdul Qadir, another Bengali writer, said Rokeya is the greatest female writer in modern Bengali literature, irrespective of whether they are Hindus or Muslims. All right. So I've established that both Rabindranath and Rokeya were hugely significant writers. But I'm not going to focus on their writing here. I'm going to focus on their educational activities, because both of them actually believed that India's way forward lay in education. Without education, India could not be a successful nation. All right? That's what they believed in. India could not become independent, modern, progressive, and self-reliant society without advancing in education. Both Rabindranath and Rokeya believed in that. And they also believed in indigenous education. Mind you, this is the colonial time when they started writing and when they lived. And in 1837, of course, the British introduced English education. So the medium of education in most of the schools, especially in Kolkata, was English. Especially the schools that were funded by the British government were English. So they said, Rabindranath clearly said in his book Nationalism that as long as we follow the Western model of education, India will remain colonized. So we must have our own model of education. And that is why he set up the schools, to show what should be the Indian model of education. Roque also believed in that. So both of them advocated that no, education must be in the mother tongue, not in English. All right? Because if we have education in the mother tongue, we get to know who we are, we get to know our history, we get to know our culture, and we get pride in ourselves. All right? But if we get education in the English medium from childhood, then of course we lose our identity. And the education is not really ingrained in us because it's an artificial way of education. Now, I think they are trying to push the borders of colonialism by saying all this. There's a political aspect to it. All right. So Rabindranath said in one of his essays, The Way to Get It Done, there's the title of the essay, The Way to Get It Done. He said, I repeat, our education is a thing which we should first of all take into our own hands. All right. And that was the fundamental difference between Gandhi and Rabindranath. Because Gandhi was, celebrating the spinning wheel, Chorka. All right. Because he believed that would give us identity. Because, cloth is the contribution of India to civilization. So a spinning wheel will give us identity because, number one, we can reject the British cloth, all right, or clothes that come to India. And also by spinning our own cloth, we can give ourselves a sense of pride that we can do things ourselves. Rabindranath said that is rubbish. The only way forward is through education. All right. Spinning wheel, I think V.S. Naipaul also was hugely critical of Gandhi for celebrating the spinning wheel. He said that Gandhi is primitive. He's taking us backward. A leader should look forward. And Rabindranath always looked forward. All right. And he said, this is what he said. And if you are familiar with the discourses between Rabindranath and Gandhi, you will get to know that they had huge fights over this. Although they were mutually respectful of each other, their worldview was so diametrically different, all right, that they would write open letters disputing with one another. And Rabindranath said at one time, this is what he said, I'm quoting, in my view, the imposing tower of misery, which today rests on the heart of India, has its sole foundation in the absence of education. All right? Caste divisions, religious conflicts, aversion to work, precarious economic conditions, all center on this single factor. So all the ills of India, all the sufferings of India, whether it is caste-related, religion-related, mind you, we were having frequent riots between Hindus and Muslims during Gandhi's Satyagraha movement. All right? So all this, Rabindranath said, is because of our ignorance. So we have to really educate ourselves. All right? And as I said, he also rejected the colonial model of education so that Indians would not become what he said, humorously, Ingo Bangas, Anglophile Bengalis. So he actually coined a word for it, Ingo Banga, all right, sarcastically, so that we would not become Anglophiles. So what was Tagore's objective of education? All right, what kind of education did he promote or champion? He believed in holistic education. Notice the fundamental difference between Rabindranath and the Western model of education. Rabindranath thought that the Western model of education was based on the idea of success, the idea of power, the idea of material gain. So if you can get a first class, you become a professor or become somebody hugely successful in society, that is the goal of education. Rabindranath said, no. That is not the goal of education. Education has to be holistic. Education has to be wholesome. Education should also, of course, should give us knowledge and information, but it should not stop there. Education should also invigorate our moral and spiritual side of life. All right? It should cultivate our feelings. Mind you, he was a poet, so feelings is very important for him. So he said it should cultivate our feelings, empathy, sympathy, and spirit of sacrifice. And for Tagore, sympathy was very, very important. You know, he set up the schools, I will come to that later, in Shantiniketan, right? Which was surrounded by Santal villages, Muslim villages, Hindu villages. And Rabindranath would take his students to walk through those villages so that they could see the people there, Hindu, Muslim, Santal, and see how they live their real lives so that they can empathize with them. Because most of the people are very poor there. All right. And that is one of the reasons why he set up the schools there, so that the Indians could see how people live their lives in Indian villages, because he believed that the heart of Indian civilization was in the villages. And unless we are familiar with the village life in India, well, we are not really Indians, according to him. All right. So education should not only teach us how to get a good living, but also how to live well, meaning how to live with moral awareness. All right. And we should also be able to know our place in nature. Rabindranath was a great lover of nature. All right. He believed in the idea of Advaita, the Upanishadic concept of Advaita, which means non-duality. This whole world is one, and everything dwells in God, according to him. All right. So unless we know our place in nature, unless we know our place in existence, the totality of existence, then education is futile, according to him. So notice how encompassing his vision is of education. And he believed that that should be the model of education. Okay. And this is what he wrote in his book, Personality. I'm quoting here. We may become powerful by knowledge, but we attain fullness by sympathy. The highest education is that which does not merely give us information, but makes our life in harmony with all existence. And as I said earlier, Rabindranath believed that everybody has the right to education. Whether you are untouchable, whether you are Muslim or Hindu, there should be no discrimination, or women, there should be no discrimination. All right, everybody should have the right to education. It was a basic human right as far as Rabindranath was concerned. Now, as for Rokia, the focus was on the emancipation and empowerment of women. And of course, rightfully so, because she believed that women were the most deprived people in society. And, you know, I have translated the whole of Rokia, which is called, the book, my translation is called The Essential Rokia, published by Brill in the Netherlands. And I was taken aback by the power of her sarcasm, all right, how caustic she is in her criticism of the Muslims, all right, because Muslims were the foremost when it came to depriving women of education, all right. And she believed that, well, only justice can be restored in society only when women are educated. Because women are so neglected in society, and these are her words. Of course, she used the words in Bengali. I have translated them into English. She said that women are like slaves. Women are like prisoners in society. Women are like animals, and less than animals. All right. She said in one of the essays, she said that if a dog dies, notice the extent of her sarcasm here. If a dog dies, animal rights groups will cry for the dog. And, you know, in the Anglo-Indian media, there'll be a lot of write-up about the dog being killed by, brutally. But if a woman dies, there's nobody to shed a drop of tear. She is trying to draw attention to the fact that women are so neglected. And she has given real examples of how women would be neglected in society because of, again, the patriarchy that we live in. All right. So once she has written an essay called Griho, which I've translated as home. In that essay, she said, well, traditionally we think that, the world outside is the domain of men, home is the domain of women. That is absolute rubbish. Women have no place in the home, because even in the home, they live at the mercy of men. All right. If the husband is kind, she might have a good life at home. But if the husband is not kind, she will have a miserable life. So it's all really up to the individual man, how the woman will live her life as a wife. And she went to North India for a visit to one of her friends. And this is what she describes as about the status of women in Muslim families. I'll just read a small quote. Do the readers think that Hasina or Jamila is at home? Definitely not. The house belongs to Sharafat, and as it has a drove of sheep, flocks of ducks and hens, so also is there a group of women. Notice the analogy there. She's comparing women to ducks and hens, all right, and sheep. Really, they have no status. So also is there a group of women, or the women could be described as captives, because they have no family life. Okay, and in that essay, actually, she explains how a king, the queen, is supposed to be very, very powerful. So from the outside, we think that queen is having a grand life. But this king, she's talking about a particular king. It could be an imaginary king, actually, because she's a writer. This king has a wife. She lives surrounded by all kinds of material objects, which are grand and beautiful and very precious. But she has no happiness because the king goes to Kolkata and lives with other women. All right. So again, she is trying to highlight how much women suffer because men often are not loving and caring towards their wives. And we could overcome all this only if women were educated and enlightened. So notice where she's coming from. All right. In her story, Ordango, which I have translated as the female half, she said that a bicycle runs on two wheels. Can the bicycle move if both the wheels are not equal? If one wheel is smaller than the other? You notice the metaphor she's using there. So if the one wheel is smaller, i.e. women, the other wheel is bigger, i.e. men, that bicycle will only rotate inside the house. It will not move. So she's using that metaphor to explain that India is stagnating because women are not getting education. The bicycle is not moving forward, i.e. India is not moving forward. All right. And in her essay, one of the stories actually, Ganfall, which I've translated as the knowledge fruit. All right. She says, look, she's using the Christian idea of, original sin, where Eve was tempted into eating the forbidden fruit. And she says that, look, women are the one who took a bite of the forbidden fruit of knowledge. So women have more right to education than men. Adam took only the leftover part. So why are they trying to monopolize education which women have brought to the world? Notice the clever use of the Christian text. In her another story, allegorical story, the freedom fruit, which is Mukti Fall, she says that again, India can never become independent unless women are educated, because men use their education for frivolous things. They are not really loyal to the country. They have no sense of patriotism. Women are the one who must lead the independence movement. So let them get education, and only then India will become independent. And we know that Sultana's dream, which is our most famous short story in English. There's an interesting story about that story. She wrote the story when her husband Sakawat Hussain, who was a deputy magistrate, had gone to Mofussil for his work. So for 3 days, Rokeya was living all by herself at home. And she wrote the story in the span of those 3 days. All right. And Sakawat Hussain was a great champion of Rokeya's writing. He loved Rokeya's writings. So when he came back from his work, the first thing he asked Rokeya is, "What have you written this time?" So she gave him the story. And without sitting down, he read the whole story. And he said, "What a terrible revenge." That was his expression, So he actually, I think Rokeya became a writer only because he was so greatly inspiring towards her. And we know that in Sultana's dream, Rokeya shows that the world will become a quasi-paradise if women get education. Because in that story, we know that, men are confined to the kitchen. She has turned the table around. In that story, men are confined to the kitchen, women are running the state. So there's no violence in the state because violence belongs to men's domain. Corruption belongs to men's domain. So the police department is not required in Sultana's dream because women are running the state. All right? Because women are carrying, more sympathetic, they're willing to make sacrifices. So obviously, if women are educated, the world will become a sort of a paradise, according to Rokeya. Now, Rokeya always uses religion. I don't know how religious she was, but of course, she used to put on a facade of religion. All right? She always used the veil and all that. And she said, if Muslims are truly Muslims, they must allow women to get education. Because Prophet Muhammad had made education compulsory for both men and women, which is true. If I've read a lot of Quranic literature, and I found that in many, many places it's emphasized that both men and women should get education is compulsory for both. And I'll quote only 2 hadiths here. Notice what Prophet had to say. In one of the hadiths, he said, seeking knowledge is a duty of every Muslim. He's not saying Muslim men. Seeking knowledge is a duty of every Muslim. All right? And in another hadith, he said, we should seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. Again, we, inclusive men, women. All right? In the Quran also, actually, it is stated. So Rokeya was using all this to emphasize that of all people, Muslim men must allow their women to get education. And as I said, she was hugely sarcastic of Muslim men. So in one of the essays, which is called Bengal Women's Educational Conference, she said, Muslims must be very, very proud of the fact that most of the beggars in India are Muslims. All right, notice the sarcasm there. Muslims ought to be proud about the fact that most of the beggars in India are Muslims. Why? Well, because they don't allow the women to get education. If your mother is ignorant, if your mother is weak, if your mother is malnourished, how do you expect the son will become, powerful and strong and educated and enlightened? Because everything comes from the mother. All right? As a mother is, so is the child. So if the mother is enlightened, the child will be enlightened. So if you want to breed strong Muslims, all right, come up with enlightened Muslims, give education to women. Notice the arguments she uses. Very, very clever arguments. Now, to implement this vision of education, both Rabindranath and Rokeya actually established academic institutions. For Rabindranath, 3 institutions. A school, which is established in 1901, which is called, it was initially called Brahmachari Ashram, all right? Later it became Shantiniketan School, which was established, as I said, in 1901. And then Vishwabharati University in 1921. And in 1922, something called Sriniketan Institute of Rural Reconstruction. So he set up 3 institutions to show how education should be like in India. All right. Ruqya set up a school for Muslim girls, first in Bhagalpur in Bihar, because Sakawat Hussain was from Bihar. All right. So after the marriage, she went and lived with Sakawat Hussain. After Sakawat Hussain's death, he died in 1909. She stayed back at the husband's home, but Sakawat Hussain had a marriage before Ruqya was married to him. So actually, Ruqya was his second wife. All right, and Sakawat Hussain had a daughter by the first wife. Okay, so anyway, she started the school in 1901, but she had a fight with the daughter by the first wife because the daughter was very unhappy that number one, she had inherited money, because as a wife you're not supposed to inherit money in those days. She was very unhappy that Ruqya has inherited money from the husband, and secondly, that she's using money for the education of women, which was forbidden, all right, in Muslim cultures in those days. So she left Bhagalpur and restarted the school in Kolkata in 1911. I think Ruqya's school was one of the very first schools for Muslim girls in whole of Bengal. There was another school for Muslim girls set up by Sarwardi's mother around the same time. All right, Sarwardi's mother, Khujasta Akhtar Banu. She set up a school around 1908-9, around that time. I can't give you the specific date, I can't remember now, but around that time. So two of the schools came up for Muslim girls, but the Hindus had many schools by then. And Ruqya was constantly emphasizing that the Hindus were moving forward, only Muslims were staying back. And we must move hand in hand. It's very important, she said. But as as I've emphasized earlier, both of them were self-educated, had no formal education. But Rabindranath had some education because he went to school from the age of 7 to 13, and then he dropped out. He was never regular at school. All right, his performance was never satisfactory. And then at the age of 17, he was sent to England to study law at the University of London. And he spent 2 years there, and we came back without a degree. Of course, his father, Devendranath, was extremely unhappy about that. So he was sent to Shilaida as a punishment, actually, to look after the family estate there. But that became a boon for Rabindranath, because a poet always likes isolation. All right. So when he went to Shilaida, he was away from the family. And mind you, Gitanjali was written mostly on the boat, because it would take him 7 days to go there, sometimes longer, to go from Kolkata to Shilaida. And he would be spending most of the time writing poetry and stuff. All right. And after moving to Shilaida, he actually started writing short stories. So it was a blessing in disguise, although the father wanted to punish him for failing his studies. All right. But Ruqya had no education. Ruqya had no education at all. Her father, Abu Ali Saber, all right, was a zamindar in Rangpur, where the Ruqya University is has been set up. All right. And he was progressive enough to marry a European woman as his fourth wife, all right, and progressive enough to send his two sons to English schools, and the eldest son to England for study. Ibrahim Saber was sent to England for study, but he did not allow Ruqya or her eldest sister Karimunnisa to have any education at all. So the only education they were given was a smattering of Arabic and Persian. Mind you, Ruqya's family came from Persia in the 16th century. They came from Iran. All right. So Persian was taught so that they could, I think Persian was also the official language of India at that time. All right. Yeah, perhaps. I'm not sure, but it was the official language at one time. And also because, if through Arabic they could retain their Islamic identity. They were forbidden from learning Bengali and English, because Bengali was seen as a Hindu language and English was seen as a Christian language. So both the languages were seen as quote unquote un-Islamic. That's why they were never taught English or Bengali at home until the sister Karimunnisa, who has been described as the first Muslim female poet in India, Karimunnisa, Rokea's elder sister, she learned Bengali on her own volition. And she is the one who taught Rokea Bengali. But you might be surprised to hear this, that Karimunnisa was discovered reading a Bengali novel at the age of 13. And the father was so upset that she was immediately married off for reading a Bengali novel. All right, so that was a punishment if you read a Bengali novel in those days in the Bengali elite family, especially in Kolkata. So the elites of Muslim elites in Kolkata would be speaking Urdu those days. All right, including Sarwardi's families, by the way. All right, and Rokea's family as well. And not only that, the Rokea was forced into ignorance by the father. All right, she was also forced into isolation because Rokea's family were so strict in the Porta that at the age of 5, Rokea was forbidden from meeting other women, not men, other women outside the family circle from the age of 5. So she was forced into isolation, forced into ignorance from the age of 5. And I'm saying all this to show what kind of boldness and courage she had to come out of those and start writing in Bengali. She began writing in Bengali at the age, I think at the age of 23. In 1903, she started writing Bengali and publishing in magazines in Kolkata. Now coming to, of course, Rabindranath had home education. For him, it was not a problem because the whole family was into literature and culture. His sister Swarna Kumari Devi was the first, fiction writer in Bengal. His brother Satyendranath, the first civil servant, Indian civil servant in the British civil service, was also a writer, a songwriter, composer. Jatindranath was also a writer, musician. So the environment in the family was such. I think that was the environment that Tagore needed to, enhance his creative faculty. All right. So school education was replaced by home education, but that was a boon for Tagore, Rabindranath. But Rokea, of course, she was helped by Karimunnisa and Ibrahim Saber, who taught her English. All right. After the family went to sleep, especially the parents went to sleep, Ibrahim Saber would bring a candle, and under the candle light, the brother would teach the sister how to read the English alphabets. So that is how she got her education. And Sakaut Hossain later helped a lot. Now, there are 3 reasons why Tagore decided to set up his school. All right. And number 1 is that he found the environment in Indian schools to be highly tyrannical, stuffy. It was like a parrot's cage. I think you might have read the short story, The Parrot's Training. That's a significant allegory of what Tagore used to think about Indian education in those days. All right, where the parrot is fed, stuffed with all kinds of pages until the parrot dies. And Rabindranath once compared his experience at Indian schools with the Chinese woman's experience of having her feet bound. All right. In other words, the school education environment was such that it did not help the growth of your imagination. All right. And secondly, because he found the school teachers most insensitive and brutal, unkind people. They always wanted to force their way of thinking on the children. They didn't know how to treat children as children. And Rabindranath has a famous short story called Ginni. All right, Ginni, which I have translated as housewife. Okay, so in that story, there's a teacher, school teacher. His name is Shivnath. All right, he is a brutal man. He's like Trump. All right, he has this habit of giving nicknames to people, like Trump gives nicknames to Crooked Hillary, Sleepy Joe. Shivnath did that. all right, with his students. Okay, so Ashu is somebody, I think Ashu would be a kind of an alter ego of Rabindranath. Ashu is a little boy, all right, he doesn't come to school regularly. Maybe Rabindranath is there, okay, he doesn't come to school, his performance is not so good. So one day, Shivnath, on a rainy day, as the rain started, he took shelter at Ashu's car park, all right, and he saw Ashu playing with his sister, all right, and next day when Ashu came to school, Shivnath called him Ginni in the presence of all the students. Now, Shivnath did not realize at all that that was a devastating thing for the boy, because from then on, the boy was never himself again. And what Shivnath did is that after calling him Ginni, he didn't think for a second. He just went to the staff room and had his meal there. Rabindranath said, we have no place for people like this to become school teachers. All right. Unfortunately, in many of the countries, including Malaysia, where I lived for 22 years, people who cannot find a job become school teachers. Only because the salary is not good enough. But we should realize that school teachers are the ones who are grooming our future generation. That is where the salary should be highly competitive so that we can attract the best people into a teaching profession. And Rabindranath is emphasizing that. Why should somebody like Shivnath come into teaching? He does not belong there. Maybe he should go to the stock market or something. Because that is where people like Shivnath can thrive, because that is a cutthroat place. All right. And he said that most of the teachers that he came across in Indian schools are untrained. I think Rabindranath was being kind towards them. He might have as well said that they were incapable. All right. They were not enlightened enough. So he said, I'll just read one sentence. He said, they, meaning the school teachers, know neither good English nor good Bengali, and the only work they can do is misteaching. All right. And he used the metaphor of the lamp. He said, can a lamp light another lamp if the lamp doesn't have a flame of its own? So if the teacher is not enlightened, how do you expect those teachers to produce enlightened citizens? All right. Now, when Tagore set up the school, all right, Brahmachari Ashram, he started with only 5 students. And one of the students was his son, Rathindranath. And he had 5 teachers. But the school was built on a Vedic model. So it obviously had some religious quality to it. And he, at that time, Rabindranath was influenced by Hindu revivalism. All right. So he used to get his students to recite from the Upanishad, and he used to get them to meditate. Now, how do the boys meditate? So they wouldn't have any sense of meditation, right? But what Rabindranath would do, these are like 6, 7, 8 years old boys. He would get them to go and sit under a tree for 15 minutes, just be there. All right. So he was teaching the idea of physical isolation, because when you're isolated, then you are reflective. All right. When you're in a crowd, in the company of friends, you cannot be reflective. You just go by the swing of things. Okay. So he was teaching them to be reflective through isolation. And he also introduced the idea of pranam, which we practice in our culture, right? Touching the feet. All right. But the most important thing is this. I told you earlier that Rabindranath was influenced by Hindu revivalism. Rabindranath used to condone caste system at this time. So if the student is Brahmin and the teacher is from a lower caste, he does not have to pranam the teacher, the Brahmin student. So which I found a bit shocking, because I love Rabindranath and I can't see Rabindranath condoning the caste system, but he did. But he moved away from that slowly and gradually after 1907. After the Swadeshi movement, when the Swadeshi movement began in 1905, the first nationalist movement, Rabindranath was hugely involved in that. That's when he wrote the Bangladeshi national anthem, right? Yeah. And but the movement became increasingly violent. So in 1907, when he saw the movement was being hijacked by the terrorists, he left nationalism forever. So he did not participate in Gandhi's nationalist movement. Gandhi tried his best to bring him into the movement, but he said no, and he wrote against nationalism. All right. But at this stage, Rabindranath was very much under the shadow of Hindu revivalism and nationalism. And he also glorified the Indian poverty at this time. All right. So in Rabindranath school, there would be no furniture, no toothpaste was allowed, no shoes were allowed, no hair oil was allowed, and classes would be under the trees. Of course, trees. Rabindranath loved trees. If you have read his short story Bolai, you know how much he loved trees and he loved nature. So the idea of having the schools under trees was so that children would start loving nature and they would have to develop a kind of an intimacy with nature, which was very important for him. All right. So in a letter to the Maharaja of Tripura, this is what Rabindranath said, defending his idea of glorifying poverty. He said, I wish to keep my students away from all the luxuries of European life and any blind infatuation with Europe, and thus lead them in the ways of the sacred and unsullied Indian tradition of poverty. All right. And in Tokyo, when he was giving a talk in the presence of school students, he explained why he decided to introduce the school. He was a bit hyperbolic at this time. He said that he decided to set up the school to rescue the children from the suffering at the hands of the schoolmaster. All right. So that the environment in the schools were joyless. He wanted to make the environment more joyful by giving the children freedom. So if you studied it at Tagore's school, well, you might become a Nobel laureate like Amartya Sen, right? But the beauty was that if you are in the class, which would be under a tree, and if you suddenly decide to climb the tree in the middle of the class, you are allowed to do that. All right? Or if there would be a bird calling from the tree, the whole class would stop and try to appreciate the music. So Tagore was constantly trying to create an intimacy with nature. And mind you, now only we are talking about that environmentalism, the world is getting distracted. Rabindranath was aware of that 100 years ago. How significant environment is for the survival of the civilization. So he was a genius. All right. He was 100 ahead. We are talking about globalization now. Rabindranath was talking about globalization 100 years ago. Of course, a different kind of globalization, fraternity of humanity. But nonetheless, he was talking about globalization beyond nationalism. All right. But I said that, initially his school was quite Hindu in the sense that he called it, even the name of the school, ashram, would indicate to you that it was a kind of a religious institution. But he slowly moved away from that and it became co-educational and so on and so forth. And he followed a regular curriculum at the school. But in the evening, there would be no lessons, only cultural activities. And Rabindranath said that he was a poet first and a poet last. And he said that his school was a poet's school. And another place he said the school was a poem. So notice the metaphor there. The school was a poem, but not in the medium of words. All right. And therefore, so much of appreciation for cultural activities, so much of appreciation for nature at his school. The school was upgraded to a university, Vishwabharati, in 1921. And that was international university. He called it International University or World University. All right, because there he wanted to unite and harmonize all cultures, all knowledges. And he said that, he hoped, I'm quoting from Rabindranath here, he hoped to achieve a great federation of men. Men here should be humankind. All right, in those days where gender awareness was not so acute, so he used the word men, but we should replace that word with humankind. So he hoped to achieve a great federation of humankind, a unity wider in range and deeper in sentiment, stronger in power than ever. So he really wanted to create a cosmopolitan society where all humankind will come together. In 1927, he established a chair for Islamic studies at the university. I know in Bangladesh there are many people who are critical of Rabindranath, all right? Especially those who are religiously inclined, they criticize Rabindranath because he is a Hindu. But Rabindranath had great appreciation for Islam, all right? And every time the Prophet's birth anniversary would arrive, he would write praising the Prophet in the newspapers, because he always believed in Hindu-Muslim unity. He believed that India could not become a progressive society unless the two communities came together. All right. And with that view, in 1927, he established a chair for Islamic studies. In 1932, he established a chair for Persian studies. In 1937, he established the Chinese studies department. So his imagination was getting increasingly more and more inclusive, multipolar. All right. And it became a manifestation of Tagore's global outlook. And the American philosopher, who is currently at the University of Chicago, Martha Nussbaum, she's a great admirer of Rabindranath. Why? Because she believes that Rabindranath is the greatest, thinker on education, especially on cosmopolitan education. All right. So she believes that Tagore's model, she has actually written an article where she said that Tagore's model of education should be implemented in America because patriotism creates fanaticism. All right. We must love our country. So God has given us two hands for a reason, right? So that we can keep one hand on ourselves, on the country, and extend the other hand to the rest of humanity. And Tagore believed in that. So while you love India, don't confine yourself to India, extend yourself to the world beyond India. Okay, so I think I will move on to, how much time do I have?
It's totally up to you. Usually we keep 40 minutes for the speaker, sir.
You can speak for as long as you want, no problem.
Yes.
No, I mean,
Sure.
Can I have another 15 minutes?
Go ahead. Yeah, sure. It's fascinating.
Okay, thank you very much. Because, I'm very passionate about this topic. I'm writing a book on Tagore's education. So this will be part of that. And I'm researching on that. And as I said, it's not easy to research on Rabindranath and Rokeya sitting in Australia. Because
I'm intervening. This presentation, you have to submit it, as I requested you earlier, for publication in our journal that will be launched in August, called Critical Insights. So we are reserving this presentation.
Yes, Professor Sarwar, I remember that. Yes. So thank you for reminding me. I would love to give my article to you. So that's not a problem. But as you can see, I'm really very, very passionate about these two writers. I've come to Bengali literature quite late because I did my PhD on American literature and spent a lot of time on American literature. Then when I moved to Malaysia and Singapore, I started writing on Malaysian Singapore literature. I've got about 16 books on Malaysian Singapore literature. When Macmillan invited me, I don't know how, they invited me to translate some of Rabindranath's short stories on the occasion of his 150th birth anniversary in 1911. So I decided to move into Tagore then, and since then I'm writing on Bengali writers. I'm at the moment I'm doing some work on Sufia Kamal, and inspired by Sufia Kamal's son, Sajid Kamal, who lives in America. So he's also a translator. I'm a translator, so we have become friends now. So this is a very small world we live in. So as I mentioned earlier about Rokeya, she began the school in Bhagalpur, right? And then the relationship with her stepdaughter did not work out. So she decided to move to Kolkata. And there she set up the school with a legacy of 10,000 rupees, which Sakaut Hussain had left for setting up the school. Rokeya was childless. She gave birth to 2 daughters, but both of them died as infants. So obviously Sakaut Hussain must have thought about this as to how she is going to spend her time, because she didn't have a family life. Especially after Sakaut Hussain's death, she wouldn't have much of a family life. But her passion was in women's education. So that's why he left 10,000 rupees so that she could start a school. And so obviously, rightfully, she named the school as Sakaut Hussain Memorial School for Muslim Girls. Named the school after the husband, because after all, the husband was the inspiration behind this. And Rokeya started like Rabindranath. She also started with 5 students in Bhagalpur. But she was the only teacher. And that was an immediate problem, because she had never been to school herself. And she had no idea as to how to teach 5 students all at the same time. And she told her biographer that this is what she said. When I first began the school with 5 students, it seemed most surprising to me as to how one teacher could teach 5 students together and at the same time. All right? And she also had no experience in administration. All right? And so she would go and learn from other people, and she would go to the Brahmo schools in Kolkata with the help of P.K. Roy and Sharola Rai. She got some experience on education and teaching, and that's how she started the school. But many of the problems, as I said, came from the fact that Rokeya was a Muslim, a woman, and a widow. The moment she started the school, the religious fanatics started a smear campaign on her. All right, because mind you, those days, Muslim girls were not allowed education. And Rokeya was going beyond the customs, all right, of the society. So many of these fanatics spread many kinds of scandals against her, saying that she was just using the school as a show to sell her beauty and attract men. Some of them would say that Rokeya is a companion of prostitutes. I'm quoting here from the critics. All right? And some of them said that she was a whore and an embezzler of funds, meaning that she was stealing money, embezzler of funds, pilfering money from others in the disguise of running a school. And that was brutal. And that was possible mainly because she was a woman and a widow. All right? Rokeya was really shattered by all these criticisms. And if you read her work, you'll see how much she suffered for this. All right? Sometimes the family would also stand against her because there would be so much of gossip against her in the society. No wonder she's a Renaissance woman. She fought against all this to set up this school. All right? And the second problem was getting students, because how do you get students when Muslims are against it? So she would visit homes to persuade the mothers to send their daughters to the school. Now, there are many reasons why the Muslims were against education. Hindus were also largely against, but Hindus, especially Brahmins, were more progressive. Hindus are ahead in terms of education than the Muslims at that time. There are various historical reasons. I'll not go into that. Now, one of the theories in those days was that if a woman gets education, the husband will die soon. So education of women would lead to widowhood. And Rabindranath actually has a short story about this Khatha, which I have translated as the exercise book. All right. In that story, Uma becomes a victim of that. And the husband eventually stops her, not only from going to school, but also using the katha for writing her stories. All right. So that was a prevailing idea at that time. The woman should not get education because the husband will be subject to death, early death, if the woman gets education. And of course, the other theories were that women would get westernized. All right. They would turn into Christianity. And these were some of the accusations were brought against Roque as well, that she was Christian. She was not a Muslim. She was just used. She was a Muslim only name. All right. She was using the Christian ideas to corrupt Indian culture. All right. She was highly westernized, and girls will become Western if they get education. They will become arrogant. They'll use the education to persecute the men. And Roque has a short story called Shoro Jagat. All right. In that short story, Gauhar is the father of 9 daughters, and he wants to send his daughters to education. But the brother-in-law, Jafar, he is vehemently against it. And Jafar says, as I just mentioned, that if the girls are sent for education, they will become Christians. Jafar believes in that. So Jafar is the voice of society, and Gauhar is the voice of conscience. All right, and that they will also become arrogant. And this is what Jafar says at one point. And this is my translation. All right, taken from the story. When ants, and of course women are being compared to ants here. All right. Notice the frequent use of animal imagery in Roque's writing to describe women. If ants grow wings, they like to fly. So if women get education, they will start flying. All right. When women get education, they contradict and condemn men. So a woman's job is to play the role of a wife and nothing more. All right. Therefore, of course, the daughters would not be sent to school, because vast majority of the parents would be against sending like Roque's father himself would be against sending their daughters to school. Apart from that, Roque also, both Rabindranath and Roque had a lot of financial challenges. All right. When Rabindranath started the school in 1901, his monthly income was 200 rupees. And he wanted to give free education to the children. So in other words, he would have to get all the money from some source, because he was not getting any fees from the students. But his own income was only 200 rupees. And this is what Rabindranath writes in his memoir. He writes that in 1902, my mother had to sell nearly all her jewelry for the support of the school before she died in 1902. But of course, Rabindranath's situation changed after getting the Nobel Prize. All right. And he invested most of the Nobel Prize money into the education institutions. And Rabindranath became very famous, as you would know. He went to Europe multiple times. He went to America 4 times. He came to Indonesia for 3 months. He came to Malaysia twice. He went to China twice. He went to Japan multiple times, mostly to give lectures. And Amartya Sen said that Rabindranath would get $750 for a scold. He doesn't use the word lecture, he uses the word scold, because Rabindranath would be scolding people about moral development and all that, and he would get $750 for every lecture. And he invested all that money into the school. All right, so that actually reprieved his financial situation a bit, but Roque's situation never improved, because after the legacy money, 10,000 rupees was spent. She didn't have any other source of income, and so she would get government support only on an ad hoc basis, maybe 5,000 rupees there or 2,000 rupees in another place, but really there was no regular support from the government. So she would actually write to the newspapers to raise money. but she hardly got any support from the rich Muslim men. That infuriated her, because all these rich Muslim men would be giving a lot of money to men's education, but they would not spend a cent for girls' education. So when she wrote a letter to the Musalman, one of the Muslim-led newspapers of the time, to raise fund for building a boarding house, she didn't get any positive response. All right, and that was very, very frustrating for Rokeya. So Rokeya, what kind of education did she believe in? I've said about Rabindranath that he believed in inclusive education, holistic education, wholesome education, education that would cultivate the feelings and imagination. Rokeya also believed in that kind of education. Now, Rokeya did not believe that education should lead to imitation of another's culture. All right? We should not imitate the West, she said, because imitation of another culture will lead to destruction. She has a short story called Nurse Nellie. In that short story, Naima, a young 19-year-old girl, she is converted to Christianity by the missionaries. And gradually, as the story progresses, Naima's conversion destroys not only her, but the entire family. So Rokeya is saying that, that is the consequence of if girls are not educated, number one, and secondly, if we start imitating another culture, it results in destruction. And in Woman's Downfall, which is actually Istri Jatir Obonoti, which I've translated as Woman's Downfall, she said, the purpose of education is not to blindly imitate a community or a race. It is to develop the innate faculties of the individual. And she believed that education should enhance our moral side of life, our intellectual side of life, and also the physical side of life. And she emphasized exercise for girls a lot. All right, Bengali girls don't like to go for exercise, right? Somehow it will not have a positive consequence, but she encouraged girls to go for physical activity. In the school, there would be a lot of physical activity. All right. And I mentioned that Rabindranath's school was Bengali medium from the beginning, but Rokeya's school was Urdu medium, because in those days the elites in Kolkata, elite Muslims in Kolkata would use Urdu as their mother tongue, although it was not. All right. And she was very sarcastic about this. Okay. And she said in one of the articles in Musalman, she said, the Purdanashin Mohammedan girls in Kolkata are not willing to learn Bengali even without fees. And Rokeya was, amused by the fact that these Muslim women, they would speak a kind of a distorted Urdu, but they would insist on using Urdu. She didn't understand why. Okay. So she wrote in one of the essays, this is what I'm quoting from her. In running the Sakwat Memorial School for the last 16 years, I've come to realize that the Muslims in Bengal have no mother. That is, they have no mother tongue. They consider Urdu as their mother tongue, no doubt, but the mangled Urdu that they speak tortures every tissue of the eardrum. Okay, so she was encouraging the girls to learn Bengali. And she struggled from 1915. She struggled to introduce Bengali as a subject. And then she struggled to introduce Bengali as a medium for instruction. Eventually, she succeeded in 1927. So we really have to give her a lot of credit for doing that. Mind you, her mother tongue was Urdu, because her family language was Urdu, not mother tongue. Family language was Urdu. Her mother was from Dhaka. Okay. But from a Zamindar family in Dhaka, so obviously they would also speak Urdu. Now Rokeya's school was largely religious. She knew that she could not attract students unless the school environment was religious. So she had a prayer room in the school. She would encourage the girls to recite Quran. All right. She had a place for the Ozu, and she would encourage the girls to read the Quran in Bengali. Why? Because she believed that reciting the Quran like a parrot in Arabic is not of any use. We must understand what is there, and we can comprehend things better if it is in the mother tongue. So she would encourage translation of Quran in various languages. But she also, like Rabindranath, she also increasingly made the school more multi-faith. All right. Although her biographer Shamsunnahar Mahmud says that the school was all through for Muslim girls, Sufia Kamal disagrees with that. In her book Ekale Amader Kal, Sufia Kamal says, no, there were Christian girls at the school and Hindu girls as well as students at Rokea's school. And Rokeya herself, in a letter, Sufia Kamal was related to Rokeya. So Rokeya wanted Sufia Kamal to study at Rokea's school. So she actually wrote a letter to Rokea's mother so that she would send Sufia Kamal to Rokea's school. But the mother declined. And Rokeya was hugely disappointed by that. And this is what she wrote in a letter. I have my school. Many girls study there, Hindu and Muslim. So I'm reading that to emphasize that there were Hindu girls there at the school, Hindu and Muslim. But the daughters of my relatives do not study there. Okay. And like Rabindranath, Rokeya also had an inclusive curriculum. And she would be teaching all kinds of subjects, including science and mathematics and English. English was a compulsory subject at her school, right? And this is what somebody called Fatiha Khanum wrote to Abul Fazl, our writer, all right? Great writer from Chittagong, Professor Abul Fazl. This is what Fatiha Khanum wrote to Abul Fazl about Rokea's school curriculum. Everything is taught in her school, from Quran recitation and his tafsir to English, Bengali, Urdu, Persian, home nursing, first aid, cooking, sewing, and whatever else is essential for Muslim girls to learn. Okay, but and like Rabindranath, she also emphasized music in her co-curricular activities, sports, poetry recitation, acting, and so on and so forth. And like Rabindranath, she would also encourage open space teaching. So Rabindranath had the schools, the classes under trees and open spaces. Rokeya would also encourage that. Okay, I think I'll stop there because, maybe there will be questions and some comments as well.
Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful talk that we had today, which is really, I would say, new to our students as well as perhaps to many young scholars in the context of Bangladesh, the term autodidacts, and they all perhaps are well acquainted with Rabindranath's and Rokea's writings, but the perspective that you have shed light on was really very encouraging, and it was a wonderful time we had. As it is a Maghrib prayer time, perhaps we do not have that much comments from or queries from our listeners. So I will I'll just add a little point, if I'm allowed. Let me introduce myself. I'm Ahmed Tahsin Shams, lecturer at the Department of English. And really, when we teach courses like eco-criticism, we should really bring, for example, as Qayyum sir has mentioned, that idea of nature in Rabindranath Thakur's writings, and the way he prescribed even 100 years ago the true motto of civilization and progress. Thank you, sir, for bringing light into that. I would invite now our Professor Ghulam Sarwar Chaudhary for some concluding remarks. Sir, the floor is yours.
Is it prayer time already?
Yes, sir. I mean, it has 5 minutes. Sir.
So no questions at all.
At this moment, perhaps because of the time, we do not have questions. Yes, today.
Well,
Yeah, because it's really a wonderful
questions.
talk we had here.
Yeah. Anyway, this is a unique talk, I would say, in the context of both Rabindranath and Rokia. I know about the scholarship, the solid scholarship of Professor Qayyum on Rokia and also on Rabindranath, his translations. He's a famous translator. I think one of the best translators that Bangladesh has produced so far. So, as I told you that I have to give a talk myself to speak more about Professor Qayyum. He's so well known. Just look up, those of you who are interested to know more about him, look up, go and search, look up Google and you'll get to know him about all his writings, as he said, in American literature, in Singaporean, Malaysian literature, in which area he is regarded as one of the leading authorities in the world. And of course, in literature related to Bangladesh and India. So it was a pleasure having you with us, Professor Qayyum. It was very enlightening, not only for my colleagues and students, for myself too. And as old colleagues and friends, I would always look forward to you to support us. This is a new university and a new English department. And I will need your support from time to time so that, and let me mention to you that Notre Dame University, Bangladesh is perhaps the only private university which is genuinely non-profit because it is run by the Fathers of the Holy Cross. So nothing doing about making any money. It's all about imparting holistic education, as you mentioned, that Tagore wanted, that Rokia also wanted in a way. So here at NDUB, we are committed to holistic education. Education not for just success in life, education not for making money and becoming corrupt citizens, but education in order to become real human beings. Education that will not divide us as humans, as the world is divided. As you can see, the US is divided. As also you can see many countries around us, they're raising walls. You see unknown walls, dividing, in the name of nationalism, in the name of jingoism, that we don't want. We're all human beings. We belong to one family, and we want to exist as human beings. And we require that kind of education. So thank you so much again. And please accept my debt to you. I'm indebted for this wonderful lecture.
Thank you, Professor Sarwar. Thank you very much for inviting me. It was my pleasure to give the talk, and I really enjoyed giving the talk.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
We'll be grateful to hear from you more, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, I could give a lecture on Malaysian literature later.
Sure, we'll later fix on
just
something
to introduce, like that. Because I think in Bangladesh people don't know anything about Malaysia, Singapore literature. So maybe I could give a sort of introduction.
Maybe we can introduce a course on Malaysian Singaporean literature. You remember I wrote that book review of that diaspora writer, Bengali writer, Bengali poet in Singapore. You asked me to do. I did that. So yeah, we'd love to have a Singaporean Malaysian literature course. So we'll be in touch.
That would be great, actually.
I will be, and I'm in touch with you anyway. Yeah, so we can introduce that. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
So thank you again. Thank you again.
Okay. All the best to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
again.
much.